But I think the first piece, the first thing I would want your listeners to think about is take notice. Become aware. Am I persistently really tired? Am I waking up even after a couple of nights of really good rest and still feeling totally depleted? Am I walking around foggy and on autopilot? Am I irritable and cranky? We talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
Of course, all of these things, it could be lots of other stuff going on, but it might be a sign of burnout, right?
Hey, welcome back to Raw Talks. My name is Rye Hannah, like rye bread, and I'll be your host. Today, I've got a really interesting guest today. Her name is Alison Campbell, the visionary and founder of Unburned, a company on crucial mission to eliminate workplace burnout. Woo! Alison's journey is truly remarkable, transforming from nearly 2 decades in high-stakes corporate roles, including chief of staff and head of strategy and analytics at a billion-dollar global company, to now becoming a certified health and wellness coach. Her health scare became the catalyst for change, propelling her to combine executive experience with wellness expertise. Today, we'll delve into her insights on burnout, personal well-being, leadership, and how to achieve ambition sustainably. Get ready for the ride, y'all. Allison, thank you so much for joining us today. How's it going?
Yes, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation and
Yeah.
loved the energy in that intro. I'm ready to go.
Love it, love it, love it. Everyone usually says, I love your energy. I never really know what that means, but I think I'm starting to see it as I'm recording myself.
Yes, you've got it. You've got it.
Well, let's take it back to you, Allison, and I'll bring in a few of my thoughts in between as we talk about you. And I wanted to start our conversation by beginning about your journey from corporate world to catalyst for change and basically how you started Unburn. And you were saying in our intro, you spent almost 2 decades in the corporate world, and you reached impressive heights, including your multiple C-suite roles. And I wanted to ask you, can you paint us a picture of what your life and career looked like during those years? Because being that high up in leadership and managing that much money, it's kind of hard to leave sometimes, especially when you're enjoying that kind of work.
Absolutely. Yes. I think it's such a great question because when I think about my corporate career, right? So the first chapter, nearly 20 years, I loved working. I loved, experiencing all the various roles and companies and the wins, particularly with teams along the way. That just made it so fruitful, so rich to, experience what it was like inside these really impressive corporate companies building strategy, launching new initiatives, again, really, really enjoying the work. And at the same time, once I became a working mom, trying to find my footing. I think we'll talk about this more, but it's really difficult when you shift and you're trying to hold on to pieces of your identity from your 20s or early 30s. It used to be you could work as much as you could possibly work. And when I shifted into becoming a mom and really wanted to be present for my kids, all bets are off. You have to still figure out how to balance your ambitions, get the work done, of course, and be present. And so we'll talk more about the shifts along the way and how that started to erode my previous ways of working, which just can't scale that way when you become a mother or a parent. But I want to open up by saying I really loved my career. I got messages very early as a young girl that you can be anything, you can do anything. The sky's the limit, right? If you work hard and you set a goal, you can achieve it. And I believed it. I worked super, super, super hard to recognize that, yep, I've got a goal. I've got a ton of ambition, and it was really for me about the inflection point of figuring out how to balance ambition with family, with leisure and things outside of work, and look at that holistically in terms of, what's your identity outside of just who you are in the workplace. So I think I'm still on that journey, frankly, but I'm excited to dive in further to tell you more about it.
No, totally. And that makes sense. And on that note of shifting, I just wanted to comment really quick that it is hard. Even, no matter what role you're in, whether you're an individual contributor or you're all the way up in the leadership chain, being a working mom is not easy. And I'm with you. Like in the beginning, you're just like, do all to get the maximum position, like raise, salary, whatever kind of visibility work you can get when you're like less than 30. And then when you become your 30s and you're like, oh wow, like this is what real life is. You get married and you buy a house and then you got other responsibilities. You got to take care of loans and you got kids and like, oh wow, okay, it's shifting. It's a constant shift. It's not a juggle. It's a transition, right? And every different experience you have becomes a transition. So I like that word you use, shift, and I think they both kind of work interchangeably. And speaking of that, you talked about you loved your job and you left. So I wanted to kind of get into that a little bit. Transitioning from a high-powered corporate career to founding your own company, Unburned, is a massive shift in itself. What was that internal process for you as you decided to leave the corporate world, a job that you love, to embark on this new mission?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think like so many professionals, like so many women, working moms, parents. I actually, by the way, let me edit that. I hate the term working moms because we don't say working dads. So, I
Yeah,
think
working
when
parents.
working parents and ambitious women, and, if we think about the past several years going through a pandemic, and if you were homeschooling children during that time, layers and layers of additional pressure and stress that I think when we were going through it, it was all about trying to stay resilient, trying to, continue to push through. We were really scared globally about a pandemic, this virus that we didn't know anything about, and trying to balance that magic word, continuing to work, continuing to raise a family. I think we all really collectively felt a ton of stress. And I would say that for me personally, I was a VP at a billion-dollar plus company, as you mentioned. Tons of responsibility. Felt to my core, I felt like it was really important to make sure my team was okay. And from a where are we going as a company, where are we going as a human, a collective, making sure that it wasn't just about the work. And I put a lot of pressure on myself to, again, everything going on at home, homeschooling children, plus, again, saying yes to new opportunities as they came up. Like I wanted to be the person to keep things running smoothly at work during such a tenuous and really stressful time. And so as I continued to take on more responsibility and recognize like, hey, wait a minute, we're embarking on this next stage of growth and we're bringing AI into our product, right? Like how are we connecting strategy to execution? Let me take on business analytics, right? So I continue to put more on my
Oh
professional
my
plate,
God.
which was again exciting, loved the work, was so bought in on the mission. But I think we have to sometimes recognize when the plate is just overflowing
Mm,
and and it's, whether it's momentary or whether it's, figuring out more sustainable ways of working and living for the long haul, which we'll talk about,
mhm,
how to make sure we're keeping those things in check. So for me, the big catalyst was there was about, I don't know, a 9 to 12 month period where I was feeling super unwell. I was ignoring that, frankly, which is so disappointing to say out loud. But I was having stomach aches, I was having headaches, brain fog, just didn't feel like myself. Like I remember constantly just feeling like I was walking around in autopilot. And the stomach aches, I just kept thinking like, oh, I got to tweak what I'm eating. I'll go to the doctor after this next board meeting. I'll take some time off. I'm sure that'll reset until I ended up in the emergency room. I had, again, it just kind of like normalized. I'm tired. Yep. That checks out with all I have on my plate.
mhm.
But I ended up with really, really severe stomach aches and ended up in the emergency room. I had to have surgery. And that was the wake up call that, oh my goodness, this is only not sustainable. I have to make some significant changes, right? Like I had surgery, I wanted to recover, but I had a lot to unpack. Like all of the pressure I kept putting on myself. Again, it's not feasible for one human being. And I knew that I had to take a step back, and I will just say very privileged position to be in, to be able to say I'm gonna take a step back, by the way, say goodbye to a career I love. Who am I? Right? So we'll talk about some of the identity pieces as well, but extremely fortunate and grateful that I was able to take that step back. But I really had to process and unpack, like, how did I get here? And how do I go back to my next role in a way that I don't get back to this place? And by the way, how do I continue to show up as the mom and the person I want to be and be present and model for my kids what a sustainable and full career and life looks like.
How did your family and kids react to all of that?
So my family was super supportive, of course, of the career pause. But if we back up and we think about the moment of you have to have surgery, everyone
Yeah,
was really worried.
yeah.
I remember this moment, and this was the sort of non-negotiable, like it's time to make some changes moment. I got home from surgery. My husband and my mom were kind of helping me get into the house and get up into bed. My mom's a nurse. She's always been like my number one caretaker.
Look at that, how helpful that is to have at home.
Yes. And then my husband, of course, and so they were helping me into bed, and my kids looked so worried, and I was trying, you know the move, right? As a mom, mommy's okay, and
Been there too early enough.
yes. And so I'm like, I'm okay. I'm home. I'm so excited to see you guys. And they're helping me into bed, but I did struggle to get into bed. And
Oh,
my
man.
daughter just started hysterical crying, like just seeing me. And I wasn't fooling her in that moment. Right. And so I get chills actually just reliving that and telling you it was really difficult. And of course, as moms, we don't want our kids to see us unwell. Of course, I don't want to see her crying ever. And so for me, I was like, I am on the journey now to get better, to get strong. I'm not retiring. I want to have a career, right? And I want to continue to model. You can balance ambition with everything else you have in life, but for me, it was non-negotiable. Like this has just gone too far.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I should have been a little bit more clear with my question. My question was more, how do your kids and family react to your health scare, not so much to the career pause? But you know
Yeah,
what's so funny? Even though I asked it open endedly, your initial shift was, well, yeah, she's asking about my career pause. That just shows how rooted we are in
I know.
career, 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 career. Like, that's it. That's
Yes,
it. That's who we are. That's it. We need to break that, like shatter it to pieces completely. And I think the first person I know of at least that's doing it is that Neha Rush. She has a book called The Power Pause that's
yes.
encouraging women to take a break when you have kids and kind of figure things out for yourself. And who are you without your career? If you haven't checked that out, listeners, really great read. Haven't finished it myself, but it's not about finishing, it's about absorbing. So great read to kind of sink your teeth in it. And have you tried that one out, by the way, just as a
I
little
do
side note?
have it. It's on my summer reading list, as a matter of fact. I have it in my other office, so that's a good prompt that I should pick that one up next.
Yeah, it's so good. And but to come back to what you were saying, I think it's so interesting that we're just so like when we talk about being ambitious, we just focus on career. We don't think about anything else in life. Like, let me
Mhm.
try out rock climbing and see if I can climb Mount Everest. Like, why can't that be a source of ambition too? Why is
Mm,
it we're always thinking about career in terms of who we are, identity, and what it means to really be successful in life? And it's I can't
point.
even imagine what you went through. Like surgery, I've never had a surgery in my whole life until I had my daughter.
Mm.
And it was like during that whole process, I had to go through surgery. And now I got another one coming up. And it's scary. Like that word itself is scary. And when you're in the room, what were you feeling and thinking? Because you were just focused on work, heads down on work and family. And all of a sudden, this big S word comes in and suddenly you're experiencing that. How were you feeling? How did you even take all of that in at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Really scared. I had never had surgery myself. You kind of think about those are the moments where you start to think about the fragility of life, right? Nothing, we can't take anything for granted. And so I'm so fortunate that I've never had any other medical issue before that. But that was the take stock moment. Like, hey, nothing is a given. And so we all have to be living every single day. And I know sometimes it sounds very cliche, but we have to be living our life to the fullest. And in that moment, I will say I was both scared, but I recognized that I didn't want to have regrets.
Mm, that's so interesting. What does living mean to you since you just mentioned that? Like, we shouldn't be like just kind of moving through the motions of the day, but we need to be living. What does that
Yeah.
mean to you?
Yeah. I think I really have changed so much about how I perceive happiness, being mindful and present in every day. It used to be a race, right? Get through the day, get all the things done, check everything off the list. Weekends were a marathon of pack it all in, catch up, right? Constantly going, doing, but not living. So for me, living is finding moments of joy throughout the day, throughout the week. It's not about when I get everything done, I can finally rest, or when I get everything done, I can have fun with the kids and be silly.
It's
Because
never gonna happen.
never gonna happen. Right. So how am I making space for silliness? How am I making space
Yeah.
for truly being present? And so I'll just share. I
Yeah.
actually have a prompt now on my calendar every morning at 7 a.m. It comes up on my calendar, so I see it on my phone, and it says, "How do you want to show up today?" And so
Mm,
every single day I think about that. And I think about as a little thought starter for my day, being really mindful, even if it's really busy, even if I have a ton going on, how do I want to show up today? And the answer is different almost every single day, right?
yeah.
Depending on what's going on. But it's
Right.
a reminder to live, not just to do.
I love that. Live, not just do. I'm gonna quote that. We got a little shop coming up, and we're gonna put
Yeah,
all the quotes from the guests. That's going in there.
I love it. Oh, good.
I love that so much. I think it's so important that you mention it, like asking yourself a question when you first wake up in the morning or at whatever point in your day. Because sometimes as a working mom, first thing in the morning doesn't happen. You're getting your kids ready to go to school and making sure you take a
Yes.
shower, get ready for work, etc. Maybe it's on the way to your commute. Well, whatever your situation is, I love the prompt of a question. There's so much noise out there about what are your daily affirmations? Well, if you're only telling yourself positive things, but you're not really asking yourself the question about how you want to show up, you're not really truly showing up. I think the affirmations for me and my take is that should come afterwards. But the first thing you should do is
Mhm.
ask yourself a question like you do. And I do something similar. In March earlier this year, we're in June now, I I wrote down a question and I said, if I were to die by the end of today,
Mm,
how would I like to have spent my time? And that's such a hard question to answer because people don't want to face death. They don't even want to deal with it until they're told you only have this much time to live, which is even then scarier if you think about it.
yeah,
But for my faith,
absolutely.
it teaches us live as if you're going to die today. And I never really intentionally lived that way until March this year. And I started doing that. And I'll tell you, my whole day has changed. Like, when I read that, the way I prioritize is different. When I don't read it, I prioritize different things that are really unimportant. But when I do, I'm more aligned with my values. And I'm just curious for you when you said that, like, how do I want to show up today? And it's different every day. What change have you noticed when you do it and when you don't do it, if that happens?
Yeah, I think it helps for me to shift into focus, presence. It helps me absolutely to just have another moment of reflection. Am I doing the right things today? And right is such a tricky word. So am I prioritizing things that are going to move me closer to my goals, whether that be for business? Right? Again, where am I making space to just have some fun today and some rest? Never had rest on the menu previous to my leaving the corporate world. And so, it does. It causes that moment of true presence. Like, how am I spending my day today? How do I want to show up? I'll tell you, one of the biggest regrets of my corporate chapter, particularly the last couple of years, coming out of COVID, was traveling globally, again, just hustling, grinding, wanting to do my very best at work for myself, of course. But I also had such a weight of responsibility of wanting to really make sure everyone else within my workplace was okay. I'd get home, and I think this probably resonates with some of your listeners. You feel like you're so exhausted, you just have nothing left to give. And so when I think about the question, how do I want to show up? That includes how do I want to show up as a mom today? Because when I think back, there were so many evenings where you're just going through the motions. And I spend time with my kids. Family dinners are super important. We sit down at the dinner table every single night. But if I'm really honest with myself, I wasn't super present every single night, right? You're thinking about all the things you still have to do. I got my next trip coming up. I have that next meeting. And so the question every single day, how do I want to show up, puts me in that mindset of I want my kids to remember mommy being super present and fun and silly. And we had so much fun growing up. And so it puts me in that space versus just, again, doing the doing.
I think it's so hard to, when you have so much on your plate, as you mentioned, and you mentioned overflowing. And I was just thinking, I'm not countering here, right? Just wanted to share a different perspective. I was just thinking, sometimes we feel we're adding so many things that it's overflowing, or we don't even know that it's overflowing until it's falling on us. But other times, the sheer weight of the plate can also be
Mm,
causing a lot of stress and impact too, without there being so much there. And I think they're both kind of interchangeable. But I wanted to get your thought on that really quick before I ask you my next question.
Yeah, it's a great thought. I agree. I think that sometimes we don't feel how much we're being anchored down. We just keep taking on, and we kind of lose sight of ourselves, not only taking care of ourselves, but we lose sight of what do I even want? What's important?
That
I'm
makes
putting
sense.
so much on to achieve, but am I happy? Am I present? Am I connecting with the most important people in my life? To your point, if I look back on my life, am I going to say, I enjoyed it along the way, or I just achieved a whole bunch of stuff and I was waiting for the list to be done? So I think, yeah, it's when you said the heaviness, yeah, it sometimes can be such an anchor dragging us down.
Percent. Yeah, I don't know how that just came in my mind. Like as you were saying it, just like a little bubble popped up.
Yeah. I mean, I
I
think
just
that's
wanted to bring it up to you. But, I'm curious, working mothers who are ambitious to get, or people who even want to become mothers, who
mhm,
want to get up to that corporate ladder, who want to get to the executive director, VP positions, but don't know what it would look like to be that and be a mom at the same time.
yeah.
And I know you said you struggled with being fully present with your kids, even though you really kept the set family dinner sacred. That was like your sacred time with your family and you protected that. But if you had to advise a working mother right now who is aiming for that role, like executive director up, what would you tell her about how can you do both at the same time without losing that piece of being present?
Such a great question. I think, and let me be really clear, I think it's 100% doable. I think that
Interesting.
my experience, of course, there's so many contributing factors that led to that moment. And
Mhm.
so I think it's doable. I think that the first thing I'd say is you have to create some awareness around what's most important. And so for me, as I think back, a lot of my identity, a lot of what I considered success was external accolades. It was the promotions, it was the title, it was people saying, "Great job, Allison." I think as women, we want all of those things. And especially in a work dynamic where we're still working very, very hard to get a seat at the table, to be in those rooms. I was often the only woman in the room. And so having someone say, "You're doing a great job," was everything. At the same time, I think for women, it's really important to define success on your terms. And so how are you going to find that internal excitement, that internal compass around, I don't need someone else to tell me it's great. I know for me this is aligned with my values and what's super important. So that's the first piece, just building some awareness around priorities outside of what the world is telling you success looks like. If you're striving for that role, it does not mean though that you need to give 80 hours a week. You can define the parameters outside of work to make sure that you're achieving the balance that's important to you. So I think that's the first piece. I mean, we're going to get into, I know we're going to talk about some micro habits. The piece I want to really make sure is also recognized and super important. A career is a marathon. And so when we think about a marathon and the comparison to physically running a marathon or doing anything physically that is, you need endurance, you need that strength, we have to think about sustainability. How are you building a career for the long haul? Because so many of us keep thinking, I'm going to sprint, I'm going to work so hard, I'm going to get that promotion, and then I'll be able to ease a little bit. But the problem is that ease never comes because we're training ourselves to sprint and sprint and sprint, not take the rests and the breaks and the create sort of the space we need. And that's just not sustainable for the long haul. So I know we'll talk more about that, but I think those are the two pieces is really identifying what's important and what does success look like for you. And then how are you creating routines and habits? Because by the way, you deserve them that make sure
There you
you
go.
are sustaining, restful periods outside of just the striving and the ambition.
Oh, totally. Three words came to my mind as you were saying that. And I wanted to see how you felt that connected or didn't connect. I'd love to hear your take on it. You said awareness. So, A, I'm going to add a B and a C, boundaries, and
Mhm.
C, communication as a
I
whole.
love that. I love that. And can I now print that on a t-shirt? I love that.
There you go. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I feel like everything I speak now, especially when I work with clients, relates back to our kids.
Yeah.
because there's so much we can learn from them. And if we can kind of
Yes.
incorporate that childlike mindset, like more play, more just no rules, just do things, not think too much about them. The kind of the way that kids kind of explore the world and want to touch a spider, even though they don't know it might can potentially hurt them, or really get close to a bee. They're just crazy. But how they learn is really phenomenal. And so I
Yes.
think when you bring it back to things that you might be working with your kids, like, oh, they're learning ABCs. Well, let me see, how can I incorporate that as an acronym in my work? And I think that kind of connected with me in terms of what you were saying. But I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more about that sustainable word that you were saying and those micro habits. Let's get into that. As a executive leader for nearly 2 decades, I'm curious how your perspective on leadership has evolved,
Mhm.
especially focusing on well-being. And you talked a little bit about this and having the promoting sustainable work being a key pillar and those micro habits. So I was wondering, could you touch on that a little bit as you go into answering this question based on your own experience and how you prioritize well-being for you and your team?
Yes. So first thing I would say, I think being well and building resilience personally is so important as a leader. Creating vision and excitement and, some of the plan and getting people really bought in on wanting to deliver against this really ambitious vision. It's also about building and modeling resilience so that the team can come together and collaborate in a way where there's innovation, where there's the ability to, we're in such a disruptive time right now with AI, with so much changing in the world and roles every single day changing pretty dynamically. We need the ability to be flexible and agile and cut through that, which requires, honestly, overall well-being and resilience. I think when we're in a culture that we're just doing the doing and we're on autopilot and we're chronically stressed out, physiologically, we are not, cognitively thinking and doing our best work. It is, just it's backed in the research. And so when we think about, I just got to push through and I have so much on my list, I can't possibly break. Well, actually, the quality of the work that's getting done probably not as great as what would happen if we were taking those sustainable breaks. So as a leader, modeling that, creating a culture of truly well-being as a strategic imperative, critical. And it's going to become more critical as roles and workplaces continue to get disrupted by AI.
What does it mean to you to model well-being as a leader? Because I've seen it, I've had a director.
Yeah.
I'm running. Running's my thing. Even when I'm going on a road trip, I'm going to get out of the car and I'm going to run for 10 minutes and then my husband's going to pick me up on the way.
Yeah.
But she was still working weekends and said,
Yeah.
I'm only going for 30 minutes to check my email, end up spending 3 hours. Like, she was open about that. And what I've seen when I was in the corporate world, whatever she did, the managers under her followed. And my manager was one of them. And then the team that I worked with, like my individual contributor fellows, they also followed that behavior. So I'm really curious, what does it mean to you to model well-being as
Yeah.
a leader? And could you like give us a little persona of that, if anything, to help
Yes.
somebody like answer that question if they're looking to understand, well, I do exercise and I tell my team, what else do I need to do? What else I need to consider
Yes.
here?
Yeah, I think it is about some of the unconscious, the subliminal norms, if you will. So I'm seeing for 7 response time in 5 minutes. So that means I have to do it. So it's some of the unspoken things that I think we have to be really mindful of how we want the rest of the team to perceive what's expected and what needs to be done. I think that modeling looks like I'm going on vacation. I trust you all that you've got it. I'm not going to be checking in. I think, for so long, this badge of honor, this like frankly, I need to be involved and I want to be helpful. I think for women too, it's not necessarily I'm so important I need to be involved. It's more I want to make sure I'm still helpful. So it's coming from a good place. But that's telling your team then when they take time off, they need to kind of have one eye open and continue to check in. I think it's about really creating space and norms around rest is good. Rest is going to help us all show up and be the best we can be to do good quality work. I think it's really difficult though, because I also want to make sure we're saying everybody works differently and everybody has different schedules. And so I think we actually have to sometimes take the unspoken and make it spoken and say to teams, hey, have to maybe sometimes catch up at night or on the weekends. I don't like making that a regular cadence, but I do that because that works within my schedule. I also want to show up and be present for my son's baseball games, which means I'm making the trade-off that sometimes I want to work on off hours. That does not mean that you have to match and mirror my schedule. So I think sometimes it's about acknowledging in this 24/7 world of work that gives us optionality and some flexibility, but that doesn't mean we all have to be on 24/7. That's just not right.
Yeah.
That's not realistic. So
Right.
sometimes it's about setting some parameters and making sure the team is clear. These are the expected norms, and then here's what's not expected. And actually, making sure everyone understands that.
I'm going to challenge you here. And I wanted to just quickly say this is off the record. We're going to edit this out. If you don't agree with something I say, feel free to challenge me. You don't
Okay.
have to agree with everything that I say. Okay. Like
No,
the ABC thing, like I love a good challenge. So I try to challenge you too, if you're comfortable with that, if you haven't noticed. But
yeah.
challenge me back. It's great. It adds for good, flavor in the conversation.
Okay, cool. All right.
All right. So back in queue. Um, I love that. And it's so important. But I wanted to challenge you here because even when you communicate, like I've seen, even as a founder myself, people would send me emails and at the bottom of their signature, my work hours are different from yours. Please don't feel the need to reply and respond. But, as I was an individual contributor, even if I saw something like that, the first thing in my head would be like, okay, yeah, it's there, but I know what the reality is. Okay, my manager told me or my director told me, don't follow the same hours that I do, but I know the reality. If I don't, I'll lose my job. And so, how do as a leader, how do you kind of infiltrate the mind of your individual contributors to really let them know what you're saying is what you really mean and what you expect versus them thinking you're just saying it to just put a face forward?
Yeah, it's such a good push and I love it. I think it's about recognizing and rewarding the behaviors that match up
Mm,
with the words.
mm,
So, as a culture, for so long, we've been celebrating the hustle, the 24/7 grind. When something is super urgent and last minute, and then someone pulls out, the rabbit out of the hat, we celebrate. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And so we're rewarding the hustle. I think when we
mm,
think about matching, I'm saying this and I'm going to reward you, I'm going to celebrate publicly the fact that you took some time off, you took your PTO, and then you came back and you did a really great job. I mean, that's a very bland example, but I think it's about matching the way we're recognizing and celebrating the
mm.
behaviors that we want to be ingrained from a well-being strategy perspective. And making sure, by the way, I don't know that we have enough time to get into this whole realm. We also need to, as leaders, make sure the work and the ways of working facilitate people doing their best work with rest, with breaks and the ability to focus and have time to absorb. When we're just back to back 10 hours of meetings, we're not reflecting and considering how the new information we just got can be integrated into next steps or a plan. And so I think it's about creating ways of working that help to facilitate the bigger picture. I want my
Yeah.
employees to be well as humans. I want my employees to be well because that's going to help generate better work and more innovative collaborative thinking. One of the hallmarks of burnout, so we know it's exhaustion, it's depletion. It's also some cynicism and some negativity. And so when everyone's walking around like super cranky and irritable, like we're not doing our best work. So I think when
Mhm,
we take what's happening physiologically, we're in emotional dysregulation and we translate that and we think about how that shows up in the workplace.
mhm.
Of course, we're not doing our best collaborative work. And so as leaders, I think we really have to match like what are we celebrating? How are we creating space? How are we trusting our team versus like some of the micromanaging that happens when you swoop in, you take over and people feel really frustrated. All of that has to be in place for people to feel like they can truly do their best work and it's okay to take space and to rest.
That makes so much sense. And I love that you said that because when you do have back to back meetings, which is kind of the culture nowadays, I mean, it
Yeah.
was there before, but I think it's now not just at the leadership level, it's trickle down.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know what your feedback is on this or your perspective and advice that if somebody is in back to back meetings, regardless of the role, what would you recommend that they do? Let's start at the leadership level and then get to the individual contributor.
Yeah.
For a leader, if you're in back to back meetings, you know from your experience, it's not sustainable and it's not
Hmm.
promoting well being. And it can potentially lead to burnout, especially if you continue to do that over the course of a year, for example. How do you prevent yourself from booking those back to backs when in your mind you know that it's important and it needs to get done within a certain time and that's there for like 100 things? So how
Yes.
do you kind of prevent that back to back schedule from filling up for yourself? And then we'll get to the individual contributor part.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think first I want to acknowledge it's hard because as individuals, you're part of a larger ecosystem, right? We're not in a vacuum where you can say, you know what? I'm just going to not show up to my afternoon meeting. So I want to acknowledge
Yeah.
for your listeners that
Yeah.
it's hard and it's super interdependent. So
Hmm.
we can't independently just say, nah, I'm going to cancel Wednesdays and have a full free day. It
Hmm.
requires collaboration. It requires sort of a broader perspective around the organizational priorities and how we're executing against them. So, with that said, it's hard. I want to be clear. I think leaders have the ability, and if not the responsibility for their teams and for themselves, to make sure they're regularly checking in. I know leaders who did this so well, and then I know, other leaders, employees who just kind of, again, were doing the doing, not, and there's no judgment. I'm not saying that they weren't thinking critically, but so often we feel like, well, I have to show up to everything. I was invited. It's important. This is a priority. I think we have to take stock regularly and think critically about what meetings do I need to be a part of? As a team, am I showing up and actually signaling that I don't trust my team to be there? And can I be empowering more folks across the organization to take a more active leadership role? Maybe that's a stretch opportunity for someone on your team, right? So, how can I think about my time management and delegation as a win for someone on the team? Am I creating buffers? So, before things just get booked, 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 how am I allocating time on my calendar where things are just blocked out? And I'm saying, you know what? A couple of times a week, I need some deep focus time. I need to absorb. I need to look at reporting. I need to reflect on progress against the goals. I need to think about my team's development, not once or twice a year when we're doing reviews, on as an
Hmm.
ongoing
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
So again, super complicated and it's not a one size fits all because it's, what organization are you in? How many people are on your team? What's the composition of a daily schedule, a weekly schedule, a monthly schedule? But you have permission to audit your calendar, to create break blocks. And one of the micro habits I advise clients, individually as well, we need to be creating a buffer at the end of our days. And it doesn't have to be 5 days a week, but I think a couple of times, 2 to 3 times a week, if we're creating space between the end of our workday and our evenings, it helps create a couple of things. One, it helps us take stock in the way I just mentioned. What's coming up tomorrow? What do I have for the next 7 days? Am I completely oversubscribed, overscheduled? I got a big meeting and when am I going to possibly prepare for this? It helps us on an ongoing proactive basis to make sure we're looking at how we're spending our time and not just kind of flying into the day. So that one's a little obvious. But the other thing it helps us do is mentally, we know the list is never done, but it helps us create a ritual around mentally closing out the workday so that we can ask ourselves a few questions. How do I want to show up tonight? I've got, well, maybe a soccer game and a baseball game, but how are we gonna make space for a quick family dinner? It gives you just that to really think about. I'm now as a mom, maybe going into my second job, right?
Yeah.
Like my
Yeah.
work day's done, but like I want to have a great time with my family. You get kind of like that to-do list out of your brain and down on paper somewhere. So and it gives you that transition between work and home in a way that I think enables you to reflect on how am I spending my time.
That when you said that, I was just going to use that word transition. It's like you're physically turning the button for off for work off.
Yes.
Like that's your physical action by
Yes.
creating that time to assess what's ahead. Or like I'd first start with what did I do today?
Yes. That's part of
Celebrate
it.
that and then look at what's ahead so that way you're not just because sometimes I feel like you when you just jump to what's ahead, you kind of disregard all that you did today.
Yes.
And
Great
sometimes I
point.
feel like we fall into that trap of just keep doing, keep doing. And when other people celebrate us, okay, do more so they celebrate us more, and the cycle continues. But I think part of what you're saying sounds like we also need to celebrate ourselves there too,
Yes.
not just expect it to be external. What is your thought on that?
Yes. Absolutely. And there's science behind that. So when we celebrate our wins and we recognize that even small wins count, we're activating part of our brain, the hippocampus, where we're consolidating memories. We're creating new pathways to recognize, ooh, small win. I did achieve it. It does count. And so it's actually a reflection part of a broader sort of system that I've put in place for companies and individuals. Reflection is super important. It does also help us get back into emotional regulation. So, to your point, that transition period, it's not just about I'm clocking out, press the button. It's also giving your brain a space where you're recognizing, wow, I did get some great things done today and this week, and you're getting yourself back into emotional regulation. So you're actually physiologically lowering the stress. And so instead of us working up until the very minute that we have to go pick up our kids or do whatever is coming next, we're giving ourselves that space to get back into emotional regulation, to lower the cortisol, to come down, right? And then we're a little bit more calm when we go into our evenings.
That that reminds me of the topic I learned about in psychology, self-regulation, and I think it kind of
Yes,
bites into what you're talking about, emotional regulation. And it makes so much sense that if you have that block, that transition block where you're going to look at what you did today, you're going to acknowledge a win or more, and then you look at what's ahead and figure out how you're going to plan. Well, knowing that you have a plan, or you're going to make time for it tomorrow, even if you don't have that much time to plan for what you got coming up the rest of the week, I can see how, and I can feel it physically, how it's already going to reduce that stress for you.
yes,
And I feel like when we don't do that, we carry that stress load subconsciously. We take it home. Our kids spill some water, or they didn't pick up the toys, or they're like, I'm not going to bed right now. I want to stay up and watch TV. And we blow up. And it
yes,
had nothing to do with them. Or your spouse said something to do and you snap.
right. It's that
But
last.
it had nothing to do with them, and they're wondering, "Well, what happened? What did I do?"
Mhm.
And there you go. And so I feel like it that prevention of transitioning from work to home and making an intentional shift and acknowledging everything that you need to do for the next day is carrying over and overflowing into our personal lives and
Mhm.
creating chaos there, which is it doesn't even need to be there if we just take care of that piece of transition. And I just thought of that as a powerful shift that you can implement. But I'm curious for you now as a
Mhm.
founder, how
Mhm.
do you make that shift between, you're turning the off button on your work and you're doing the same thing that you're recommending to clients, potentially what we just discussed.
Yes.
How do you then shift so you don't kind of overflow those feelings of stress and overwhelm into your personal life when you kind of leave the work for the day?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think for me, this is a lot of newness. So while I had a corporate career for 20 years, being a founder is a completely different motion. There's so many new things I'm learning every day. And we have to also remember that whether you're a founder, you're in a corporate role, you're a brand new mom, new is hard. Like our brains are wired for comfort. And so when we're doing anything new, it's even that much more pressure and the cognitive load of trying to figure it out is real. And so that kind of wears us down more quickly. And so I absolutely take time to close out my day every Friday. So today on my calendar, we're recording this on a Friday, I close out my week. I have a ritual where I'm doing a more pronounced look back, recognizing because you don't give yourself credit, especially I would say as women. We're just like, it wasn't enough. I've got so much more. I've got to get that next, client or meeting. So for me on Fridays, every week, most weeks, unless something comes up, I do a look back and I say, wow, you know what? I whatever happened this week. And I catalog it as a win. I reshuffle because so often we're putting every single tedious idea that comes into our heads as a to do. And then that's my moment of like, no, that's not actually important. I've got so much I want to get to, but I need to remain focused so I can make progress. I can stay well. I can't, as a solo founder right now, get to every single thing. It's just not possible. And if I try to, I know we're going to go back to some old patterns and not feel great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do the everyday thing, but I do a weekly ritual. And then with my family, we also have like a little moment Friday nights, sometimes Saturday mornings, where we say, all right, what are we going to do for fun this weekend?
Mm,
We talk about when are we going to rest? Like, let's go to the library, let's take out some summer books. And we work that in. And for me, that is about modeling for the kids that weekends are not just for running around and packing everything into the schedule. Weekends also need to be about leisure, about fun. We let the kids come up with ideas. So we say, we've got a 2-hour block. What do you want to do that's fun? Within reason. It's not, fly to Disney.
let's take a trip to Europe.
Yes. And so that helps to make sure we're making space. And again, modeling for the entire family, for our kids, that rest, leisure, fun, it's all part of the program. That is about making sure we're living and not just doing.
Rest, leisure, fun. That's a nice acronym. Okay. Got another one for the books.
Yeah. We're just racking them
Thank you.
up.
Yeah, I really like that. I was trying, as you were speaking about it, I was trying to remember there was a Latina executive who mentioned that she does some kind of weekly review, as you mentioned. I think she called it like a weekly business review. And it's the same thing, but she would send it to her manager and she would say, here's everything that I accomplished.
Oh,
Here are some things that I need help with, and here are some wins that I wanted to celebrate, something like that. And I think it's important to not just do that for your work, as you were mentioning, but also your life, and not just send it to your manager, but do it for yourself, even if you're a founder. As an individual contributor, not
yes.
back up your schedule, like pack it up with meetings back to back.
Yeah.
And I think what you mentioned here, like even whether regardless of what your title, your role is, you can do that daily transition from work to home. How are you
Mhm.
going to plan? And the weekly one that you mentioned on a Friday or whenever you get time before the end of the week. But if you're going back to that conversation we just had, that point in our conversation about individual contributor, what would you recommend as a leader? What
Yeah.
would your advice be?
Such a great question. So I'm going to flip it and first talk about as an individual contributor, and then we can talk about leadership and setting those expectations. So as an individual contributor, I think understanding that you have agency and you have the ability, whether it is in a weekly recap or an informal conversation, your weekly check-ins, to talk about it with your manager and say, I feel like the quality of my work is suffering because I don't have time to do the doing, to execute, to, do what needs to get done from my role perspective because I'm in meetings all day long. I think that sometimes also as an individual contributor, you have perspective on more of the tactics that's moving the business forward, where maybe your manager, because they're in so many more meetings, they don't maybe see an opportunity for dots to be connected, or for you to make a suggestion that could actually help things run more effectively. So I would say be curious, be open with your manager, like, hey, I see this opportunity for, I don't know, this product meeting I'm joining on every Tuesday and Thursday for me to actually not attend, and maybe here's what I would do instead, or there's a bunch of us and we're doubling up. And so my recommendation is my colleague joins, I join this other meeting, right? And that's part of what we talk about in our team meeting. Again, very generic example, but it's really about the permission, the agency to make those recommendations and say, you know what, I'm just sitting in too many meetings and I don't feel like it's effective. So that's the first piece. And then I think it is about getting really curious and maybe carving out some time to take a look at, okay, in these last 5 days, maybe I even go back further. I look at the last 30 days. You actually go back to your calendar and you take a look at places where maybe it felt redundant, or you could have gotten the notes. There are so many AI note takers now
Yeah.
where we don't want to necessarily fill our calendars with just reading the transcripts, but are there ways that from even a process or efficiency standpoint, you can look back over the last 30 days and find some spaces where maybe you didn't need to attend that meeting live? So I think it's about being curious and realizing that you're in the driver's seat of your career. And if you feel like you don't have space, and then the expectation is you're getting on at 9 o'clock to wrap up and actually do the work, I think it's okay to say, we've got to make some changes.
But at the
Mhm.
same time, when you're saying like understanding if the meeting is effective or not, I think just taking 30 seconds, like literally that much before you jump from one meeting to the next, as soon as one meeting ends, take 30 seconds to evaluate. How is it helpful me being here? And what's a reason that I can choose not to be here? And if you can't answer one of them, then that tells you either you need to be there or you actually need to leave. And I think if you can do that, like answer those two questions at the end of each meeting, that can better prepare you to have that conversation with your manager. But I wanted to ask you from your opinion, just sharing that technique, if that's something that you do or you advise, what is your take on that?
Yes, totally agree. I also would say it's hard because sometimes you're in a culture where the expectation is you show up. You were on the meeting, you have to go, have to go. And so you maybe feel like I don't think this is going to be effective, but there's pressure to show up anyway, or an expectation
Mm,
that you're going to be there, or your manager wants to get the notes later and that's your role. So I think it's really questioning, what are the expectations? And is this aligned with how I want to be working, which is a much broader question, right? About the environment you're in, the role you're in, the team you're on. But I agree, yes, we need to be critical and think through, is this effective? Or so often, and said without judgment, people are on the meeting and in this virtual world we're in, they're multitasking. And so if you're like quick doing work for the next meeting and like half listening, is it worth your time to be sitting there? And like, how are you contributing to the betterment of that meeting? Which I do want to talk about the leadership piece because I think it's really important that we are, as leaders, truly architecting a workplace, processes, systems for success. And so what does that mean? That means meeting hygiene. This sounds basic 101, but what is the expectation of a meeting? So often meetings are just thrown on without clear agendas, or maybe there's like a fuzzy agenda, but there's, 20 people that are added. There's no tangible outcomes. That's a time waster. So just in and
yeah,
of
yeah.
itself, as a culture, are you setting expectations around to have a meeting? This is what it looks like. You need a clear agenda. There should probably be a pre-read. People should understand the information, any context going into the meeting so they can be prepared to speak to their piece, make a decision, make sure we're driving to outcomes. Because if all these meetings we're just spiraling and spinning and not getting stuff done, it's creating even more confusion and lack of clarity in terms of where are we even going as an organization. So I think the meeting hygiene piece is super important.
I love that. Meeting hygiene. I've never heard that before. You always think hygiene related like dental hygiene or
Yeah.
self-care, but that's so great. And it sounds like that even needs to be part of the one-on-one that you have with your manager. If that doesn't
Yes.
exist, part of the greater team meeting. So everybody hears that let's do a quick sync on meeting hygiene before we talk about everything else. So that way that you're leading with purpose and the team feels, well, yeah, I need to be thinking about this because my leader is modeling this for me. What else do you think on from a leadership perspective that you can do to kind of help the individual contributors not fill their calendars back to back, especially when you might be showing this undue pressure that I want you to be present
Yes.
as a partner on my team? How would you kind of reduce or kind of eliminate that pressure if that's possible to be
Yeah.
present?
So I think there's an opportunity, not just in an annual planning cycle, but probably quarterly, to be taking stock. What are our goals, right? Like, what's the North Star? What are we driving to for my team? So, whether you're a manager of 5 people, 50 people, how are we contributing and laddering up, right, to that North Star and maybe some of the other key objectives for the year? And then, how are we spending our time to get there? And I think so often there's all these meetings, and that's not to say that then you're going to plan everyone's calendars or tell everyone, yes, go to this, don't go to that. But it's about the reset with the team from a team meeting perspective, one-on-ones, really making sure that time is being utilized effectively and being curious, asking your team, how's it going? Like the last few weeks, you find yourself in too many meetings, what would be your recommendation? And so when we're setting annual goals, that typically then cascades into, all right, now we've got all these new meetings we have to go to get the work done. We have to make sure we're taking stock annually, of course, but quarterly, maybe even monthly, giving permission to have those conversations. And I would also say, making sure we're architecting the work. Are we just throwing priorities on to like we're achieving the goals, but we're not super clear if they're contributing? Like, do we have clear communication? Do we have clear reporting to understand, are we hitting the objectives? Because so often, again, we're just doing the doing, and then we look back after a quarter and we're like, oh shoot, we didn't hit the goal. And so therefore we need to change all the priorities, which leads then to a whole cascading of frenzy and change and many more meetings. I think it's really important that we're taking stock on a regular basis.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you provided a lot of great insights today for leaders and for individual contributors on both, like a nice balance to figure out how can you prevent burnout and kind of do work more sustainably without focusing on work life balance, but more of an ebb and a flow and what works for you and your schedule based on the constraints and whatever responsibilities you have going on in your life. And as we close out here, I wanted to ask you one last question. You talked about what burnout meant to you. I'm curious, for listeners who are not really sure what that looks like, and
Hmm.
you actually had a physical scare that
Hmm.
kind of woke you up and made you realize that this is burnout and I need to do something about it. If somebody's listening today, they're not really sure what burnout looks like. What are some things that you would help enlighten them by?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. A couple of caveats I'd throw in the beginning of this. It looks and feels different for everybody. And I think I'm a certified health and wellness coach. So I've learned about the signs and symptoms, but I'm not a healthcare provider. So if you're concerned about any underlying symptoms, I would say it's super important to check in with
Absolutely.
your physician, your primary care physician, a healthcare provider. But I think there are things that we wave away, and especially as working moms, we sort of say, "Oh, that's normal. I'm super busy, so of course I'm tired." But I think the first thing I would want your listeners to think about is take notice. Become aware. Am I persistently really tired? Am I waking up even after a couple of nights of really good rest and still feeling totally depleted? Am I walking around foggy and on autopilot? Am I irritable and cranky? We talked about that a bit.
Yeah.
Of course, all of these things, it could be lots of other stuff going on, but it might be a sign of burnout, right? So if you're feeling like you're constantly tired, another hallmark in the research is questioning your own abilities. So we put so much pressure on ourselves. And so when you think, I'm exhausted, oh, I just made a mistake. I'm walking around in a fog. Oh, I wasn't the present mom I wanted to be last night. We're starting to question our own abilities. That's a hallmark of burnout. And so if you're
For sure.
having those thoughts, it's important to take stock and say, is there something else going on? Connecting those feelings to your days. Like what was going on? Were there a ton of high pressure situations I was in? And really starting to understand, yeah, this actually could be burnout. And it might be time for me to rest. It doesn't mean you need to leave your job, but it could be a signal that you need to kind of rework and start building in more sustainable habits and room for rest.
Those are some incredible questions you shared to help start building that self awareness. And like we talked about awareness, boundaries, and communicating all of those things with the people you work with and even in your family. Thank you for sharing that. And
Of
I
course.
know actually it's going to help people who are listening in. So I appreciate all the insights you shared on burnout today, sustainable ambition, personal well being. They're all incredibly timely and crucial. I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us and your personal health scare and their expertise with us today. For our listeners, you can learn more about Alison Campbell and her company Unburned at the following social media handles and her website, which I'll drop in the show notes for you. And I want to make sure you do subscribe to Raw Talks podcast. Give me a follow on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And don't forget to watch out for our next coming episodes. I'll see you next time.